And we're live. Okay, so you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Great. Thank you, Rochelle. My name is Jay Robertson. I serve as Vice President of Development with Prospera. We're a company that partners with governments to build special economic zones and new cities with a focus on private governance. I am primarily based in Bentonville, Arkansas, and split my time between here and Roatan, where we're building our first city in partnership with Honduras.
Awesome. So how's it going?
It's great. It's a really exciting project. We publicly launched the project in 2020. That was after many years of work to obtain the first charter that was granted under the Honduran law, which allows for the creation of these special economic zones. And we started with a greenfield site of 5 acres, and over the past 4 years have grown that to over 1,000 acres with over 1,300 residents, 200 companies, and that number is growing daily. We've built new real estate projects, welcomed new companies into the zone, and it's an exciting project because we're looking to build something new, to really build a new model for governance. And that comes with a lot of really interesting opportunities. So we get to work with businesses that are doing innovative things that are often held back by other governance frameworks. We work with residents who are looking for a new place to live, and a place where they can pursue their dreams in a free way. And so it's a period of growth. It is not without challenges. Anytime you're dealing with governments, there's certainly challenges that always come into play. But it's an exciting project, and we've been really encouraged by the growth and support we've seen recently.
How many people live there now?
So we have a total number of residents is around 1,300, somewhere north of there. Not all of those are full-time living in Prospera, because we started with no housing and are essentially building our way up. So at any given time today, there's between 200 or 300 people living or working within the city. And that number fluctuates on a daily basis. And as we're building new housing and bringing new houses online, we're able to welcome more people in. So I would say when we started a few years ago, we were more just like an outpost, and our vision is to grow that to a city. Today, we look more like a small town on our way to that goal.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about the controversy with the government trying to cancel the deal, and is it with the IMF?
Yeah, so I'm happy to cover that, and maybe it'd be helpful for me to give a bit of background on kind of how we got started on this project in Honduras to begin with. So at Prospera, we see governance as an industry that's ripe for disruption. Most people don't think about governance as an industry. You think about government as just something that exists, that you're stuck with, and depending on where you're at, it can work differently. But if you look at human prosperity measured by people's ability to provide for themselves, create wealth, have a job, provide for their families, there's a strong correlation between good governance and people being prosperous. So places in the world with good security, rule of law, respect for property rights tend to have people who are more prosperous and better off. Places that do bad at those things tend to be in poverty. And so we were looking for ways to improve governance in a way that allows us to help lift more people out of poverty and live better lives. To do that, there's multiple different ways you can work on that. You could work with existing governments to change the way they work. You could try to build something new or different. Our approach was to work in partnership with the government through a model they're familiar with, which is a special economic zone. Mm-hmm. So special economic zones have been successful in primarily the East. So places like Dubai or Shenzhen in China showed that you could set up a special zone that had better rules, better respect for property rights, better tax code, and things like that to really drive investment and development into an area. But something like that on a large scale had really not been pursued on the Western Hemisphere. But it's a model that governments understand. And so we began looking for places to do this. At the same time, Honduras was looking to set up a zone to bring investment and jobs into the country. You know, Honduras has been mired by poverty and violence in the past. A lot of the migration that comes to the U.S. is people coming from Honduras to find better opportunities. So there were some really visionary Honduran leaders that sought to set up a zone structure similar to those that have been successful in other parts of the world. But the main difference was they sought to do it in a way that allowed for a public private partnership, where the government would allow for a private enterprise to create the zone, manage and operate it privately. And that would bring the needed investment for Honduras and the job creation that's needed locally. That was a long-winded way of introducing why we got to Honduras. And as you might understand and or anticipate, the Honduran leaders also knew that nobody's going to be willing to make significant private investments into a country without some really strong legal stability guarantees, especially in a part of the world that's not known for legal stability. So the zone was set up. The law that allows for the zones was set up as a constitutional provision in Honduras. So it's the highest level of legal protection in Honduras. It's further safeguarded by international treaties between the U.S. and Honduras that say that any expropriation or violation of that would result in damages to the government of Honduras. And so we were the first company to have a charter approved under that law. And to date, those legal stability guarantees have held strong. A couple of years ago, there was a change in administrations. The new administration campaigned against the idea of these zones, not really out of substantive objections, but out of a lot of political talking points to do with the previous administration and the previous campaign. But because of that, it resonated. And so they initially sought to repeal the constitutional amendment, did not they did not obtain the required votes to do that, so they weren't able to move forward with the repeal. We preemptively filed an arbitration suit to assert our rights under those legal stability guarantees, and to date, we're continuing to operate and grow. So the current administration definitely has made things more difficult in some respects, but we continue to seek a final resolution to this. But in the meantime, we're continuing to grow and build and deliver on our promise, which is to bring jobs and investment to the local economy. And that's what's been so encouraging to me, is that over the past 4 years, we've created, or jobs that have been created within Prospera are north of 3,000. So that's a big impact on an island with a population just under 100,000. And so that's how we continue to deliver on our mission, while the legal protections that we invested under allow us to continue operating in the current environment.
Yeah, it's so important that the agreement sticks and they can't just take it all, or else no one's going to ever want to invest in one of these things again.
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it's really, when you talk about government, it's a question of federalism in many respects. Like, you always have conflicts of, what are municipalities able to do, what are states and federal governments allowed to do, and even in special economic zones in places like Hong Kong, where China attempted to take over Hong Kong, or if you look at the Disney development in Florida, where the state tried to take away some of the protections of that special economic zone. These conflicts always arise at some point. The question is, how are they navigated? How do you ensure that property rights are not violated and that people have the guarantees they need to build in a stable environment? And so, thankfully, the Honduran leaders who had this idea and put it in place realized all those things and made the law stable. And we're still in a proving period right now, but it's very encouraging, and we're optimistic about the future.
Okay. Um, we got a troll comment, I think. But what about the roads?
Yeah, so if you live in any city in the United States, you probably know that the roads are built by private contractors, and that's the same thing that happens in Prospera. So for most public infrastructure projects that would traditionally be public, quote unquote, in Prospera, there's no public property per se. Everything is privately owned. And so we work with third-party private contractors to build roads, provide power, internet, utilities like sewer, anything you can imagine. Everything is privately provided within the zone.
Awesome. So if you are viewing somewhere other than YouTube, leave a comment, and if I see it, I'll pop it up. But if I don't see it, if it doesn't pop up, then the comments aren't working. So if you want to leave a comment, go to YouTube, because I know that's working, and we'll respond to live questions and stuff. But please like and comment and do all the things so that the algorithm likes us. I'm trying to get this podcast off the ground, and it's really hard in the current environment because the algorithm does not like new channels, especially that talk about politics like we do. Um, Okay, so I remember I first heard about you guys on the Tom Woods podcast, and then I saw you pop up on a Democracy Now video, and it made it sound like there was like people living on the land, and you like stole their land. But if you look into it, like for like 5 minutes, you see that like that was not the case at all. Like nobody was on this land. It was legitimately bought. Like it was not eminent domain or expropriated or anything like that. And everyone's trying to make this like controversy where like literally nothing exists because there were not people living there.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely something that's come up. And I mentioned, when the current administration was campaigning against the idea of ZAs, which is the term for these special zones in Honduras, they alleged that they would be used for expropriation to take people's property. They would be used as havens for dark money or criminals. And none of that has any basis in fact. I mean, we have very strong protections against any sort of taking of private property. I mean, the strongest in the world, literally. Our entire legal code is online, so it's completely transparent. But more than that, it's antithetical to our approach. The whole concept behind what we're building is to give people, including Hondurans, access to a legal environment where they have strong property rights, where the property can't just be taken on a whim by a government. Because we believe truly that that's the best way to allow for prosperity, is for people to have protection of private property. The unfortunate truth is that there is a history of expropriation in places like Honduras. And so when those things are alleged, they can gain traction sometimes, even when there's no substantive basis in fact. And so that's another reason that we've always been very open to people who want to come and cover Prospera, even if they don't like the idea of a free market type private city development. We invite people to come and actually speak to the people who are living here and working here, and speak to the people who claim to have been damaged in some way. You won't find anybody, like you said, whose property was taken by Prospera. There's fear of that, and it's legitimate because that has happened elsewhere in Honduras. But our approach has just always been to be very open and transparent, to say it's antithetical to our beliefs. It's not something we would ever do. And I think another thing that's been super encouraging is that as time has gone on from that controversial political campaign a couple of years ago that caused a lot of this rhetoric to come out, we've seen only growing support among average Hondurans. And I think that's attributable to the fact that we're beginning to deliver on our promise of bringing jobs and investment to the community. I mentioned that we've had over 3,000 jobs created within the project. We've also seen some public opinion polling that's been done independently to measure your average Honduran's opinion on the idea of Prospera or special zones. And the reality is it's kind of a niche issue. I mean, we're a small project in a big country, but out Prospera, they support the idea on a 4-to-1 basis. So there's actually large support among your average Honduran. And the reality is some of this opposition is just driven by people who are ideologically opposed to free market development. And that's a small group of people. And as we continue to deliver on, our side of the bargain, we see that support only growing.
I've got another question about the currency.
Yeah, good question. So within Prospera, we take kind of a free market approach to currency. There are no capital gains taxes within Prospera. And if you take that to its logical conclusion, it means that you can trade anything to someone else for currency without triggering any tax implications. So we officially recognize the US dollar, Honduran lempira, as well as gold, Bitcoin, Ethereum, cryptocurrencies as legal tender that we can accept as a jurisdiction and that people can trade with. But we don't, there's no legal tender law, so to speak, in that you're not required to use one of those if you're opening a business in Prospera. And as a result of that, we've seen some people do some interesting things. We have a large community of people who use Bitcoin as their currency. And, we were pretty early in adopting that as a form of legal tender, so to speak, within the zone. And we also allow for businesses to use that as their unit of account. So you're not having to transfer back and forth. You can just run everything on Bitcoin. And it's not necessarily because we necessarily believe Bitcoin is, the end all be all or the best thing, but we're a type of governance system that is responsive to the needs of residents. So when people say, I want to use this, you're free to do so in Prospera, and we're accommodative. And so it's a new approach, we believe, that will produce some pretty interesting outcomes. And we're already seeing some interesting stuff happening on the Bitcoin front with businesses using that in Prospera. And as with many things, we think the market is usually the best way to get the best outcome. And we're attempting to apply that to money as well.
So what are the laws? And you mentioned the whole legal system is online. Like how does that work, and who wrote it? Where did it come from?
Sure. So I mentioned that Honduras initially passed this legislation to allow for the creation of a zone with a private partner. And so under that law, there's a committee set up of Honduran officials that had the ability to review and approve a charter for the creation of a zone. So Prospera is a private company that submitted a charter to that body and received approval for the creation of a zone. And so the way it works is it's set up as the Prospera ZA. The zone itself is almost like a municipality. You can think about it like a local governmental body within Honduras. So there's a council and there's a body of laws that govern the municipality. The difference is that whereas most municipalities only handle super local stuff, the Prospera ZA handles everything to do with commercial law, tax law, regulation, everything short of national defense, immigration, and criminal law, which are standard Honduran law. But most everything short of that is governed by this legal code. And so we worked with a lot of experts who kind of pulled from best practices, the best features of the American founding, and the best things that we've seen done in other special economic zones. At its base layer, the zone is governed by common law. So it's primarily a restatement of a common law system that people are familiar with. And then on top of that, there's a tax code that's very lightweight. There's 5% individual income tax, 2.5% sales tax, 1% business income tax. We have a regulatory system that is really flexible and allows for people to pull from regulatory codes in other places that work for them. And we've built it all online first. So one of the benefits of building a new governance system is that we're not inheriting, decades or centuries worth of precedent and having to incorporate that. So we're able to build an online system where people can go to prospera.co. If you want to launch a business, join, become a resident, you can sign up online and you become an e-resident first, which is basically just a permit to come to the zone, do business there. It allows you to purchase property, to incorporate a business entity. So you do all that online. You're able to pay your taxes online, and the whole legal code itself, the actual body of the laws, are also all published online. You can go through the PDFs of all that, but the website tries to make it as clear and simple as possible. And that's really the key innovation, is that we're bringing a common law legal system with fair and low taxes, flexible regulation that allows for innovation, respect for property rights. And for dispute resolution, we don't use traditional Honduran courts. We use arbitration for the resolution of civil disputes between individuals or companies. And so arbitration is the way that those are decided within the zone. And those are the key features of the legal framework. We can go a little deeper on either one of those if people are interested. But the thing that we've seen is that this system is really valuable for businesses that work in heavily regulated industries who are attempting to do innovative things in heavily regulated industries. One example is the biotech industry, people who are developing new drugs or new therapies. That's obviously super regulated in the US by the FDA. It's a system that has been captured by the people it's supposed to be regulated or supposed to be regulating. And so the number of new drugs developed in the US has plummeted in recent decades due to these huge regulatory hurdles. So we work with companies who are able to come to Prospera actually do research in a way that's safe and compliant with the rules, but they're not having to put up with the bureaucracy that you would see in other places. So they're able to move really quickly and test these therapies, do research, and then actually begin delivering therapies to patients. That's of huge value to people in the medical field. And it's not that there's no regulation, like there is regulation on this in Prospera. The question is, how does the regulation work? And we believe it's a much more efficient way. And it's applicable not just to the medical industry, but people who work in finance or crypto or construction or any of those things. The regulatory system is built to allow for innovation in a way that is not unregulated, but it regulates behavior and allows individuals to choose the level of regulation that is most helpful for their company, that balances innovation with public safety.
So it's still under Honduras criminal law?
Yeah, that's
So
right.
how does that work?
Yeah, that's right. So the Zeti law in the Honduran constitution delegates many of the governmental functions that would traditionally be reserved to the federal government, with the exception of immigration law. So immigration is still controlled by the standard Honduran law and process. Criminal law, everything that's criminally illegal in Honduras is criminally illegal within Prospera in Honduras. And national defense is still handled by the central government. All international treaties, all that is still handled by the central government. And the way that criminal law works is really the same way it does in the U.S. for the most part, in that your federal and state government define what crimes are, but they are enforced by the local police department. So your local city is not the one determining what's a crime, but the local police department is the one that handles interdiction, arrests somebody, and then the criminal court handles that process. That's the same way it works in Prospera. So criminal laws in Honduras apply in Prospera within Honduras. And we have a local private police force that enforces those laws and remits people to a Honduran criminal court for any criminal activity. So in that respect, it's not really too terribly different from the way most municipalities handle that.
So the police force is privately funded by Prospera?
It's a private. We do have private security within the zone. Yeah.
And then if the crime was committed there, then they would refer it to the Honduras court.
Yeah, we're pretty new, so I'll be honest that we don't have a lot of case law of exactly how this works. As we grow, that probably will unfortunately happen. But that's the way the system works in theory. And Roatan is a very safe place generally. So one of the reasons we chose Roatan to start with in Honduras, it's super accessible. You can fly directly from Miami or Houston. They have over 1 million people that visit per year for snorkeling, diving, cruise ships stop there. And so it's a very safe place. The crime rates in Roatan are lower than most U.S. cities and states. And so it's not something we have to contend with like you would in some other parts of the region or even other parts of the country.
How does the more social stuff work, like schools, healthcare, welfare, marriages, stuff like that?
Sure. So in essence, our law doesn't speak to public provision of those things. So unlike a lot of states where you have the state has a responsibility to deliver a public education, for instance, that's not a requirement within Prospera because we believe that states generally do a poor job of those things. And so there are private options for education. We welcomed a new school a couple of years ago. It's a Montessori school from a company called To Higher Ground. They're the world's largest operator of Montessori schools. And it's a super high quality option. They had not yet opened a location in Latin America, but chose Prospera in Roatan for their first Latin American option. We were super excited about that. And they've since grown to become one of the best schools on the island and include pre-K up to middle school, looking to add high school soon. We have a couple of other educational options in the pipeline that'll be coming out. And so, the same applies to healthcare. There's a hospital in Roatan We're looking to open a doctor's office within the city very soon. Right now, the hospital is probably about a 5-minute drive from our property. But once again, it's private provision of those things. When you talk about social programs, like, in the US, it's Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, all of those things. We have collapsed all those concepts into one idea of a labor benefit fund for employees that are hired in Prospera, because it's a reality we do have to contend with. So, if you dream of building something from the ground up where those things don't exist, you have to deal with the fact that you're dealing with people who come from an environment where those things do exist, and you're used to having some sort of social safety net. So our approach to that has been to create a labor benefit fund for employees. So it's a portion of salary that the employer contributes to a fund for the employee. And it's kind of a combination of a forced savings account, forced retirement account, HSA. So it can be used for medical expenses or unexpected job loss or retirement or things like that. It's kind of a hybrid of a retirement account, health savings account type thing. And the individual has full discretion on where they can use that. And so the requirements are very lightweight. And once again, it's an effort to avoid the things that have proven to not work with the welfare state, or where things have gone off track. When you entrust any sort of governmental entity to provide those services directly, you completely break the incentive that makes markets work well. And so we've attempted to, prove a better way to do that. And, we're continuing to welcome, new partners on board to provide those type of options, whether it's healthcare or school or things like that within the city.
So if you are working in Prospera and you have money going into these savings accounts, how do you get the money out? Is there someone who decides whether it's meets the requirements?
There's not there's no sort of formal review process, at the governmental level. And so it's very much at the discretion of the individual as to what would be applicable for a health expense or a job loss or emergency expense. And once again, the idea was to make it so that individuals are empowered to use those. So, when you're working in Prospera, say if you're coming from Honduras, you understand that you're no longer paying into that healthcare system or that retirement system for the job you're doing within Prospera, because it's a different place. And so the individual is made aware of that and realizes that they are also no longer tied into using the providers that you can only work with in that type of social system. And so the approach is to empower individuals and not to create a bureaucracy where you're limiting providers, you're nitpicking on what people can use it for, but it's to provide some sort of safety net for people who are coming from that traditional system.
What are the laws about guns, drugs, alcohol, gambling, stuff like that?
Yeah, so within Honduras, drugs are criminally illegal. Marijuana, all drugs are illegal in Honduras. That's a criminal law that applies within Prospera. So none of that's allowed within Prospera. Guns are pretty highly regulated within Honduras, in that there's no right to individual firearm ownership. The central government, and that's a criminal offense, so central government maintains oversight of weapons. There are a large number of private security contractors that can have weapons and to provide public security services. So those two things do fall under the criminal law. That would still be under the jurisdiction of Honduras. But like I said, because we're new, we haven't had to deal too much with the prosecution of criminal offenses like that. We have had some instances come up where if there's questionable activity, we call the police and report it, because we want to be responsible neighbors as well. And so I think as we grow, we will unfortunately have more of those issues to deal with. But for the time being, the system's been working well.
Have you considered hosting a convention?
Yeah, so we've had a number of events hosted in Prospera by people who are you know, interested in new governance, interested in Bitcoin, for instance, or particular communities. And we do have a regular schedule of ongoing events. Uh, Coming up in July, there's some healthcare type focused events. We've got some crypto focused events. And a lot of the programming that we do is for people who have businesses or have startups or who are entrepreneurs who want to open a business. And so a lot of it's geared towards that. If you're interested in that world, we generally have networking sessions where you can meet different builders in Prospero, network with investors who are interested in business. We have a number of those happening in July that you can check out on our website. And probably every couple of months or so, we have some larger events that are just welcoming to people who want to come and visit Prospera. We just last year fully acquired a large resort property that's now part of the jurisdiction. So there's a very nice hotel with a beach club, restaurants. There's a golf course, and it's really just some breathtaking views of the Caribbean. And so it's a good place to come and visit. And a lot of folks who become interested in Prospero just come down for a vacation at first because they say it's a neat place to visit, and that's something we can offer. We have a hotel, but then we can also show you around some of the cool stuff that's happening at the Bitcoin Center or the robotic construction factory. And so, we have events, but we're also open to just routine visitors. So every week we have people who come down to check out the project. And if anybody listening is interested, we'd be happy to show you around for a visit. Our website is prospera.co. You can check out some of the pictures and see what the place looks like and book a stay and get a full tour as well.
Are you like clicking a pen or something? I hear like a clicking.
I'm not sure if that's on my side.
Okay. What's the weather like?
Yeah, so it's a tropical temperate environment. It's between 70 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit, mostly year round. So doesn't really get cold. During the fall to early spring is the rainy season when there are more thunderstorms, but it's kind of sporadic. If you've been to Florida, you know what that's kind of like. You can have pop-up thunderstorms, but it's a little cooler during that time, a little greener. We have a lot of people that come over the winter time because it's warm and it's nice to escape from the winter if you're looking to visit. During the summertime is obviously a high season when people are out of school, but the weather's pretty predictable. Another benefit of Roatan is that it's in the Western Caribbean. So we're not in that main hurricane corridor like Cuba or Puerto Rico where all those hurricanes constantly come through. Very rarely do hurricanes come that far west in the Caribbean. And
Nice.
so it's a stable place to build. You don't really have to worry about those types of storms you get in the other part of the Caribbean.
Someone wants to know about college football.
Roatan have a college football. There's no four-year university in Roatan right now. We do have an online university. Soccer is really big in Roatan. We have a growing pickleball league that's taking place within Prospera. So we have tennis courts. A lot of people play pickleball and soccer. We also have beach volleyball. So a lot of outdoor activities to do when you're in Roatan.
I guess I would be more into soccer than football.
Yeah, I'm a football fan myself. I'm from the South, and so I enjoy college football. But that part of the world, it's soccer's the big thing there for sure.
Okay, what else? And the medical stuff is very interesting to me because I have a daughter with spina bifida. She's in a wheelchair. And so like I'm like really interested in Neuralink and stuff like that she might be able to walk or like robot legs or something.
Yeah, it's really amazing technology. I've seen the Neuralink videos, and the unfortunate reality is that the reason a lot of those things get held back is because of regulatory bottlenecks. It just takes so long to get approval for those things. And so, we're an environment where people can come and build those things, research those things. We're a small place in the grander scheme. So we realize that companies ideally are going to want to ultimately go through that process in places like the US to get exposure to that market.
Mhm.
But we found it's super valuable for companies. Say if you have $1 million in funding to develop a new product, um, going through that system of trials in the U.S. might only allow you to do it one time. In Prospera, it's cheaper and faster, so you could do 5 or 8 trials for the same amount of money, which is super valuable for an early stage startup to find whatever a new product might work best. So we have folks who are working on stuff like human augmentation, the things that you mentioned. How can we how can they develop new technologies for things like that? And our framework allows them to do it quicker and then also actually deliver the product. So one thing that's really important when it comes to medical devices is that our regulatory reciprocity effectively recognizes approved medications in most of the 30 OECD countries. So if there's a medication that's approved in one of those places, it's approved for use in Prospera by default for medications or devices. And so it's a place where people can bring in best practices from other parts of the world. Or if they're developing something new, they can prove that it works, prove that it's safe, and um, invite patients to actually receive those treatments and therapies that could, ideally help save a life one day. And so it's that kind of development that we're made to support. And we're in the early stages of having some really interesting companies that are doing things like that around gene therapies to treat things like muscular dystrophy, people who are working on cybernetic type implants, things that you mentioned, um, with a regulatory system in place that allows them to move quickly. And so I'm excited to see what comes out of some of these new developments.
Okay, so I'm only getting comments from YouTube. So if you're leaving a comment and I'm not responding to it, hop onto YouTube so you can participate. So we have a question about the wage gap.
A wage cap for Hondurans working for Prospera.
Well, he meant gap.
A wage cap. Yeah, so good question. Within Prospera, there is a minimum wage law in Honduras. Within Prospera, the minimum wage is actually higher than outside of Honduras. And that was part of the agreement with the Honduran government to allow for the creation of these zones. They wanted to ensure that people would be paid fair wages. In reality, that minimum wage law is very low compared to what you see in the US. And so every job within Honduras, people who are working within Prospera are getting paid higher wages than they would outside of Prospera. And that's part of our promise to deliver good paying jobs to Hondurans. And that's one of the questions that people ask is like, why would Honduras allow for this? And in reality, it's bringing jobs and investment to a place that desperately needs it, but it's doing it in a way that allows for Prospera as a private company to deliver a lot of the governmental services that otherwise Honduras would be required to deliver. And Honduras also receives a portion of the tax revenue collected within Prospera. And so they're actually receiving revenue for a place that's generating local jobs without having to provide governmental services. And so it's a win-win solution. I mentioned the migration problem. That's a huge reason people are leaving Honduras to come to the US. If you look at the per capita income, your average Honduran, it's around $3,000 a year. It 10x's when they come to the US. So it's closer to $30,000 a year if they come to the United States. It's not because they became a different person when they crossed the border. They had access to opportunities. They could start a business. They could own property. And so our goal is to deliver a governance framework that allows Hondurans to have that at home without having to leave and find it in other places.
I don't know if you can hear the beeping from my end.
All good.
Okay, so I have dreams of a private city, that I imagine, because I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I think we all do it. Like, what would our private city be like? Um, and I imagine like different zones where different like cultures can be and have their own like welfare system. And so you have like one little neighborhood that has their own culture and school and medical clinic and community center and welfare system. And then like right next to it, a totally different gated community with a totally different culture. And but they all like work together. But that would just be like so much easier because right now we spend so much time debating and arguing over like what should be taught in the schools and like how should the healthcare system be, and like we have to argue about every little thing. But it would be just so much easier if we could just live in little gated communities next to each other and just economically trade with each other. But like we don't have to all agree on everything, like the whole debate about the 10 commandments in the school. Like if you want your school to have 10 commandments and another person doesn't, it shouldn't be an issue at all. Everybody should just kind of be able to sort themselves. But I feel like there's so much like culturally in America right now, there's so much like uh everyone can't segregate themselves, that's bad, even though it's totally different than the forced segregation of the past. um I don't know if you guys have thought about that, but
Yeah,
it makes me
no,
kind of like excited.
yeah,
Culture.
no. I think describing the communities in the way you did is a picture of a beautiful world, right? Because it's a place where we're not stuck in this contentious political system where every question about every social aspect is determined by a 50% plus one vote of the majority, right? And that's what we hear from people that become residents of Prospera. They say, I don't want to live in a world where I have to worry about politics. I don't want to worry about what's happening at that level. And our system is designed to allow for that, by the way. So everything that I've described about the Prospera legal code and the common law system, tax regulation, all that is the base layer. And so we actually allow for the creation of a special district within Prospera that can be a privately governed community with different requirements on top of that. As long as you're not violating the base law of the zone, you can create a community where you have an additional voluntary tax on food or something like that to help grow food, or have a communal garden or a school that does this, and you can control who's part of your community. As long as you're compliant with the base level legal code, we're actually built to allow for that, because we think that is the best way to address those issues ultimately, is privately. And once again, it all comes back to what's voluntary, because when you think about moral government, that's for me, that at the most basic levels, it should be voluntary. Like, I should assent to this. And within Prospera, everything's opt-in. Every single resident voluntarily agrees to become a resident. They sign a literal agreement of coexistence between their government service provider that's binding on both sides. And as we grow, we'd love to see the formation of more of those independent communities within Prospera that may have different requirements or do different things, because that's the best way to avoid the kind of contentious political conflict that I think so many people are tired of. So we're hoping to build a model where 1,000 little communities like that can spring up and allow for that experimentation, because ultimately it's about giving people the ability to govern themselves in a way that works for their life.
Awesome. So Bixby Coffee said if there's not an income cap, he might be headed to Honduras. And then he said, oh wait, you mean gap, not cap.
Yeah, so
oh, what were you gonna say?
No, I was just gonna say, we do have a lot of our residents are from the US. So we have business owners, we have remote workers who come to visit and decide they want to live there. And so, yeah, I would invite anybody who's interested to definitely come down and visit and check it out. If nothing else, it's a great vacation. You might like what you see.
And Jimmy's a fan. Very intelligent young man. Wants to know how you got started.
Thank you. My background's in public policy, so that's what I studied. That's what brought me to Prospera, was how can we leverage policy to make people's lives better, because we all know that policy can hurt people and make people's lives worse. So I worked a lot on policy advocacy here in the US. And you hear about projects like people starting a new country or a micronation or a private city, and a lot of time it's vaporware. Like, there's nothing behind the words. And so the first time I heard about Prospera, I was frankly skeptical, but the more I learned, I saw that the team, led by our founder and CEO, Eric Bremen, not only was super strong on the ideological grounding for what it takes to do governance well, but then can actually work with governments in the real world to build things in the real world, which people are not always great at if they're good at ideas. And so I joined the team to primarily help other people understand how the policy works and how they can use it. So I work with a lot of our new residents and new businesses to help them access the platform.
So how does the ownership of the land work? Like, do someone who like a resident, do they like own land or do they lease it and build on it like Singapore? How does that all work?
That's a good question. So I mentioned there's no public property per se within the zone. So all the land is privately owned. Prospera, because we organized the jurisdiction initially and promoted the zone, we were, and I think still today are, the primary landowner within the jurisdiction. So the process is we acquire land through voluntary market transactions, incorporate it into the zone, and once it's in the zone, we either sell that to private individuals, so individuals can purchase land and own it, so you have full title to land. You know, it's fee simple property ownership, so you can buy and own land within Prospera. You can lease land, so sometimes we lease land to commercial partners who are looking to build particular businesses or do joint ventures there, and sometimes we maintain ownership of certain parcels of land. And so, you know, one of the questions that people have is how does private governance work, and like how do you make money? So as a private company, we receive a portion of all the tax revenues and fees collected as revenue, but then we also generate revenue through real estate, through, you know, acquiring that land, rezoning it into the jurisdiction, and either leasing it to an individual or selling it to an individual. And so there are options. We have a newly completed building. It's gorgeous. It's a 14-story apartment condo tower with office space, commercial space. It's a really cool spot. And that was developed by a private construction company from Honduras that built the building. We partnered with them with the land. So that was a joint venture. And we're looking to partner with more developers for projects like that. And so those apartments are for sale. I think there's a handful left. They sold pretty quickly because they're at a great price point for Roatan. So you can buy a home, you can buy an apartment, you can buy land. All those are options within Prospera.
How much does it cost? How much are these things going for?
Yeah. So the Duna Tower apartments, I think the studio units were around $100,000 for a studio apartment to purchase. And there's some larger, you know, 2-bedroom, like on the top level. Those could go up to around 200,000, I think. That was pricing from a while back. And so I think there's only a few of those left that, you know, might or might not be at that exact price point, but they were in that range. And that's for an apartment that's got a Caribbean sea view on a tropical island. And so that's a compelling price point for Roatan generally. When you look at kind of local real estate, those can also be leased. So rented for maybe $800 a month, you know, scaling up depending on exactly the thing that you're looking at. So it's comparable in price to, you know, many places in the U.S. that are more affordable. But Roatan is a nice place. So within Honduras, it's a very nice place to be. The views are amazing. You're on an island, so things are going to be a little bit more expensive than they would be on the mainland because you're importing a lot of things. And so, you know, people ask about general pricing and cost of living. If you're in a large city in the U.S., it's going to be much less expensive. If you live in rural or a mid-tier city in the U.S., it's probably going to be pretty comparable in terms of like groceries and things like that. Electricity can be more expensive because you're on an island. But there's reliable electricity. We have reliable fiber internet. We just had some Starlink satellites set up, so we have Starlink as an additional option now. And so you have a lot of the comforts that, you know, you'd expect.
Awesome. I always like as soon as you finish talking, I forget the question I was going to ask, and then I'm like, wait, what was it? Usually my videos are like debates, and so like I'm used to like arguing with people.
Sure.
But I'm just like, this is so cool. I'm just like geeking out. Okay, so oh yeah. Does Honduras have like import tariffs, and do those apply to people that live in Prospera?
That's a good question. So that's one of the things that has been made more difficult by the current government, in that, as originally envisioned, those import tariffs would not apply to Prospera, but The current government has not respected some of those provisions, and so right now that is applying to people who are importing into Prospera. It depends on exactly what you're doing, so that is something to account for. And that's part of the reason why we did move forward with that legal dispute with the government, is because although they haven't, explicitly violated the agreement in some respects, they have, not allowed for the customs and importation process to work in the way it should with Prospero. And so there are some of those fees that do apply, but generally the tax code is very straightforward. So I mentioned 5% personal income, 1% business income, 2.5% sales tax, and there's a 1% land value tax. That's the entire tax code. So there's no capital gains taxes, no excise or fuel taxes, no social security taxes. I mean, you can run down the list. It's all compiled into those that are easy to file and easy to comply with. Once again, it's not a tax-free zone. There are taxes, but everything's voluntary as well. So it's, you can think of it almost more like a user fee, in that you understand what the taxes are. You're signing an agreement that you're agreeing to pay that, and that we're agreeing to abide by the tax rates as they exist, and that's a binding legal covenant. So
they can't increase the taxes after you move there?
Yeah, so when you sign an agreement of coexistence, you're agreeing to the laws as they exist. Our tax rates are actually capped out at a max of 7.5% of GDP. So if the collection of those taxes ever exceeds 7.5% of GDP, it would actually be refunded. I'll pause here because I think I lost your screen. So not sure what happened with the live stream, but yeah, the taxes are capped there. And so the whole idea is, once again, to create a disincentive for government to just continually grow. Oh, hey, sorry. But yeah, like I was just saying that the taxes are capped at GDP. So if the tax revenues that we collect ever exceed 7.5% of GDP, they're either reduced or put into some sort of public benefit fund that can be used for public projects, or refunded to individuals. And that's capped at the charter level. So it would be the equivalent to like a constitutional level provision that prevents taxes from ever exceeding a certain level. Once again, like, we explicitly put that in place to avoid the kind of growth of tax revenue that can be used for nefarious purposes.
How do we visit?
Yeah, so check out our website. It's prospera.co, and there's a visit tab there. So you can check out the resort. You can click book a visit. That takes you directly to the resort's website. Duno was just completed. You'll see some details about Duno. That's an option. But yeah, just click that on the website. You can go ahead and book a stay. If you're just interested in learning more about visiting, there's a form you can fill out there to get some information. We'd be happy to talk with you and help you plan a visit, or if you're interested in learning more. The website's the best way to do that. If you look at the join section of the website, we actually have a large online community that we call the City Builders Network. And so these are people who are really interested in Prospero, love the idea of the new governance approach, and want to help, but can't be full-time in Prospero today, or can't move or live there. And so the City Builders Network is where we share opportunities for ways people can contribute. So if there's a need for a new business or a new project that's coming up in the city, we share that on the network and invite people to help build it. Because once again, although it's private, it doesn't mean it has to be centralized. So it's the way that we attempt to decentralize the actual development of the city by inviting individuals and entrepreneurs to do that alongside us and keep the benefit. And so I'd invite people to check that out as well. There's lots of updates on there. If you're an e-resident, there's a lot of businesses and services you can actually access as an e-resident of Prospero. But yeah, our website's the best way to find that. It's prospera.co. And if you're on Twitter or X, it's at Prospero Global is our handle on X. You can check us out there for more content as well.
Okay, great. How much is the resort there?
So it really depends on what you're looking to book. So in terms of lodging, you can get a single hotel room for, maybe a couple $100 a night. We also have very large villas that can accommodate up to a dozen people with like separate bedrooms. And so the pricing really scales depending on exactly what you're looking for. The Duna units that I mentioned are smaller and have a kind of a more economical price point. And so that building was just completed. We're still wrapping up closings on those, so they haven't come online just yet. But those will be much more affordable, even in the resort. So um, keep an eye out for that. And if you're interested in that, reach out to us on the website, and we can put you on the list if you're interested in coming down to stay in one of those. You can check that out on the website.
What's the food situation?
Yeah, so Roatan has great fresh local seafood. Within Prospera, there's a handful of great options. So the resort itself has a couple of restaurants with different theme nights. So like there's taco nights, sushi nights, but a lot of it's centered around the local cuisine. We have a driving range facility that's kind of similar to a Top Golf, if you've ever been to one of those places. That is kind of more like a sports bar vibe where you can get food there. Bitcoin Center has sandwiches and a coffee shop. We have a beach club with dining, and we also have just some local chefs who cook daily lunches out of our beta building, which is kind of an office building, and so you can get some food there. I'm a big fan of the local Honduran breakfast. It's one of my favorite things to have there. But you're on an island, so seafood is kind of the natural go-to, and there's lots of options in Prospera and also in the rest of Roatan. So another thing to keep in mind is that Prospera is part of the larger island. So we're one community on an island of close to 100,000 people. So you're never more than 15-minute drive to another restaurant or another community if you want to go, or a grocery store where you can buy stuff to cook for yourself. The island is very long, so it can take up to 3 hours to drive all the way from one end to another, which is really neat because it gives you some variety, different things to see. There are more touristy areas, there are more local areas, and so um, you can extend your trip and check out the entirety of the island, outside of what just Prospera has to offer as well.
Right. Um, so what if cults start moving in?
Colts.
Yeah. I love learning about cults, and I just like, I want to start a cult, and I want to move there and bring
Yeah.
everybody and set up my compound.
I guess it depends on how you define that. I mean, within Prospera, as long as you're not violating, the criminal law or violating the law, you're free to set up any living arrangement you want. So yeah, that's not something we've had to address just yet. But then, there are some people who will call Bitcoiners a cult, and we've had lots of them, and they're amazing people. And so, I guess one man's cult might be another man's community. But
Yeah,
um,
basically.
yeah, it all comes back to what's voluntary, and what's you're not violating anyone else's rights. You're not violating the criminal law. People should be free to live as they see fit.
Very cool. Yeah, that's like a dream of mine. But like in a good way, not like a bad cult, like a good cult.
Yeah.
Which,
Well,
like any sort of community nowadays, is treated with suspect now. Like if you have any sort of in-group preference or rules or standards or anything, everybody kind of like freaks out. Like, oh no, it's a cult. And it's like, no, but we're a good cult.
right. Yeah, our community, I would say, is people who are all into freedom. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the vibe. People who are into freedom, people who are entrepreneurs. That's kind of what most of the community looks like today. Um, People are interested in building new things, whether that's physical buildings, or a medical device, or a crypto venture, or they're just looking to do their remote job in a place where they can live without having to worry about government. So that's how I would describe the community as it looks today for the most part.
Yeah. Um, I think it has like great potential. Um, I don't know if Hong Kong really like qualifies because China never like was okay with it. They just kind of fled. But like the idea that China is gonna just roll in and like take over Hong Kong, it makes one nervous. And so like in the long term, like it's kind of like what if Honduras just like rolls in the military and they're like, we don't care about what the international community thinks. Like if it becomes like really rich and there's so much economic prosperity going on, you could see people getting jealous and wanting to take it over.
Yeah. So in that scenario, Prospera will have been massively successful if we get to that point. But it is a good question, because when you're looking to design a zone like this, the question is, how do you align incentives properly, right? So that the agreement is respected if things go well or if things go bad. If there are things happening that the government might wish weren't happening because there's not a cartel over a monopoly of a particular industry, that can cause political people to get upset. How do you ensure incentives are aligned properly so that the government allows for the zone to coexist? And the way that we've approached it and the way that Honduras approached it was to basically, you have positive and negative incentives. So the government receives a portion of all the tax revenue that's generated within the zone without having to provide most of the governmental services they would otherwise. And so it's a net positive when it comes to just straight revenue that's collected by the government. That obviously scales with the growth of the zone. So, in the scenario where you describe the zone is super successful, then you address what happens then. On the other side, if there's an attempt to take it over because they don't like what's happening, or ultimately, governments can and could do that anywhere in the world. As we see, like, any government can decide to take aggressive action in violation of the law against citizens. So this isn't something that's unique to Honduras or unique to special economic zones. The question is, how do we design the incentives so that there's not an incentive to do that? So on the positive side, you get the revenue, you get the job creation, you get the economic growth, which is most important to the country. And on the other side, the zones are protected by international treaty. So Prospera was formed as a U.S. company that promoted and organized this zone in Honduras. And the investments that we've made are protected by a treaty between the United States and Honduras that says that any expropriation of that investment, that if the government acts in violation of the law to shut down the zone or not respect the legal provisions as they exist, then they're liable for damages. And that is arbitrated through ICSID, the Center for Investor and State Disputes, which is part of the World Bank. And so that is one way in which you deter negative action, is that there are real financial implications if the government takes away something. I mean, it amounts to a taking of property in some respects. So if Honduras were to go down that path, which they definitely could have a couple of years ago when this rhetoric was at its peak, the government could have sent in the tanks and shut down the project. They did not do that. They did violate some of the legal provisions, like I mentioned, the import and customs situation. And part of that's what led us to file that dispute preemptively with ICSID that attempts to recoup those damages. And so this is a really strong provision that applies to countries that are party to this agreement, which Honduras is one. And so, when you talk about designing the system, it's positive incentives, disincentives against bad behavior. And ultimately, that's not our goal. Like, we don't want to win a big lawsuit to get money from Honduras. Like, we want to build along the lines of the original agreement that Honduras agreed to and that we agreed to. And we're optimistic that that's what will happen. But these are the kind of things that, like you said, you have to think about 10 or 20 years in the future. What happens when you reach this point, and how do you maximally protect yourself against that sort of outcome? And I think what you could see is in places like China, where special economic zones were so massively successful that it caused capitalism to really proliferate throughout the country. And so, communist China is actually capitalist in many respects today because of the success of those zones. And so I think what is a more likely and optimistic outcome is that if these zones are successful, it causes that sort of governance to proliferate within Honduras and other places as well, because that's ultimately what we're about, is improving people's lives by improving governance. And if you can do it a better way, we know that competition within the marketplace breeds improvement. And why shouldn't the same apply to government? If a government is doing a better job at governing and creating prosperity, that's a model that can be copied. And so that's where I hopefully see it heading as we're successful.
What is the airport and seaport situation? I feel like I'm playing like SimCity.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah. So there's an international airport in Roatan. The airport code is RTB, and they have direct flights from the U.S., Houston, Miami, are daily. There's other flights from Denver, I think Minneapolis, Toronto, and then other places in Latin America. So they fly, like United flies 737s there. So it's a big plane, international airport. You land. There's a customs line, which can take 20 minutes to an hour, depending on how busy it is. But once you're through the airport, it's about a 15-minute drive to our property. So it's really easy to get there. I'm in Arkansas right now. I can leave my home at 6 or 7 in the morning and be at our property in Roatan by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So
nice.
if you're in the Midwest US, East Coast, it's usually pretty straightforward. If you're on the West Coast, there aren't as many direct flights, so you'll probably go through Houston. But yeah, you can arrive that way. The island is about there's a ferry ride to the mainland, and so you can be on mainland Honduras very quickly as well. If you want to go to a larger city or explore that part. So there are ferries. There are a couple of large cruise ship docks. So Carnival Cruises, Royal Caribbean, Virgin Cruises just started coming to Roatan. They have a lot of cruise ship traffic that comes there because it's really a beautiful island, and it's one of the best places in the world to scuba dive and snorkel. But yeah, it's I mentioned there's a lot of reasons we chose it, and it's easy to travel to. It's safe. They have a lot of tourism, so U.S. dollars are widely accepted on Roatan. You can use credit cards almost everywhere, so it's very accessible for people coming from the U.S.
Is it hard to get a visa?
U.S. citizens receive a 90-day visa, or can receive a 90-day visa upon arrival to Honduras. So you can just come down, receive the visa. If you want to stay longer than that, you either have to leave the country or apply for residency to stay. But it's a straightforward process for folks coming from the U.S. And depending on where else you're at, it can vary, but for most places, it's pretty straightforward.
What if you want to stay longer than that?
Yeah, so you can apply to become a resident of Honduras. That's a legal process that requires you to do like a background check, and depending on your particular situation, if you're a business owner or making an investment in the country, that's going to depend on how you go throughout that process. It's pretty affordable. It can take a few $1,000s. It can take a while for the process to be completed, but once you begin that process and it's in application, you can stay in the country while the application is pending. And so we've had lots of people go through this, and it can be a long process because it's a governmental process, but once it's in application, you can stay in the country while it's pending. So it's pretty workable. And we also have people who can help with that if you're interested. So we have a process to help our residents walk through that.
Cool. I remember one of the videos I saw, and in your, what is it, a coffee shop / bookshop? There's the book, The Sovereign Individual, and I was like, I love that book. Have you read it?
I have not read it fully. It's on my list.
It's
I
so
know.
long.
Yeah, yeah. I've read excerpts, and it's on my list, and it comes up frequently.
It is. I was shocked how long ago it was written, and it describes now, like the predictions are so accurate. It's kind of crazy. Um, and I was just like, this was written when, and they just predicted so many things, and so like the idea basically is people are going to become so mobile and be able to work from anywhere
Right.
remotely online that people are governments are going to have to compete for citizens. Um, and I hope I hope that that's our future, instead of some sort of like global government where it's all under one and it's super hard to escape, and you've got AI controlled surveillance state giving you your social credit score. Like I really hope that the future is freedom and being able to go to places like this, and we're not going to get stuck behind a technological dystopia.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we're seeing, especially since post 2020, when remote work became more common, you're seeing more people realize they are mobile and can go to places with better governments, and also a rise in people who are working on projects like these that look to work on competitive governance. And so I'm optimistic that we're heading in that direction. I think it's needed because you see what happens in legacy governments around the world. It's not a great situation, but there's a market for it. I mean, we see that in the people that we serve and the residents who come our way. And we hope that there are lots more projects like Prospera and other places as well that can really drive competition and governance, because it's definitely needed.
Yeah. So if I see some people have joined us because I can see like how many people are watching. But if you're commenting, I'm not responding. It's because it's not showing up on my end. So go to my YouTube channel, Moral Government, and comment there and leave a comment. And we'll answer the question, or he'll answer the question. I'll ask it. um. So tell me more about like the medical stuff. Like I'm like so interested in that. And are there things that like you're not allowed to do? Like I think like cloning might be like internationally illegal. Like are there certain boundaries?
Yes. So, that specifically would be prohibited by the Honduran constitution, criminally within Honduras and Prospera. Um, but broadly speaking, when it comes to medical treatment within Prospera, as I mentioned before, it's not that there's no regulation within Prospera. There is regulation, because I think ultimately most people do want some form of regulation. You want to know that when you're walking into a physician's office that he's actually a licensed physician. And our approach to that has been to create a regulatory system that uses the common law at its base, and then also allows for regulatory reciprocity. So if you're a licensed physician in the US, that's recognized at Prospera, the same for Germany or Greater Honduras or other top countries around the world. And so those are regulated terms. You can't just say you're a doctor and not have any sort of licensure to operate in Prospera. So our regulatory system does impose requirements there. When it comes to developing treatments, you are allowed to pursue clinical trials. Really, everything in Prospera hinges on insurance. So every business is required to have a minimum level of liability insurance. And that's our approach to regulation. It's almost like regulatory insurance, as opposed to getting a permit from a regulator that says you're allowed to do this. You have to get an insurance policy. Now, that policy will cover a portion of any damages that you cause because of what you do in the line of your business. So the insurers, as we know, are good at judging risk and assigning a value to that risk. And the premiums on these policies are dictated by the regulatory environment that you're selecting and how you're running your business. So, for instance, if you're looking to develop a new orthopedic surgery treatment or something like that, and it's not too revolutionary, but it's something that's different, you would have to certify that you're doing it along with some sort of standards, whether that's the US standards for doing that. You'd have to submit all that info to your insurer. They would underwrite your policy and define your premium for operating depending on exactly the environment that you've selected. If you're doing something super radical that's likely to cause harm to third parties without their consent, it's probably going to be very difficult to obtain an insurance policy, because that would likely incur a great degree of liability, right? And so that's the approach that we've taken to allow for people to innovate. So I'll give you one example. A company that came to us pretty early on is a group out of the US that received venture funding from some really big name people in Silicon Valley. They were working on a new gene therapy treatment that can be used to help improve muscle mass and treat people who have muscular dystrophy or debilitating diseases. And it was a new way of doing gene therapy that it allowed for them to inject it in like your belly fat to stimulate follistatin, which produces muscle mass and improves a lot of biomarkers, but in a safe way so that it can easily be turned off if it's not providing the effects. And they were looking for a place to do this because the FDA in the US didn't even have a defined application for them to begin a trial. But to do it, it would have cost over $1 million for them to begin the application and several years for that trial to happen in the US. So they were searching because they said we can't do it here. We don't have that level of funding. Although the treatment is pretty safe when it by the standard of gene therapies. So they started looking at other options and they found Prospera. And within Prospera, they were able to get started for less than $50,000 total cost for everything to get set up, and were able to actually conduct a phase 1 trial within Prospera in a matter of months. And so it's a radical reduction in time and cost associated with conducting the trial. So that allowed them to get the data they need to now proceed with the phase 2 trial. They can actually also now deliver the therapy. So they have people that are coming and paying to receive this therapy based on the data they provided. Mm-hmm. And they can also use that to submit for an FDA trial down the road if they want to bring it to market in the US. We've got a full case study on MiniCircle because it's a really interesting example of what's possible here. And we're seeing a lot of interest in this space, which is why we're welcoming a new clinical provider that's setting up later this year to support companies like this that are looking to develop new drugs to address big issues in a way that's cost effective.
Nice. Yeah, muscular dystrophy and spina bifida are the two like big, most common things. That's the reason why people, especially kids, are in wheelchairs. So I know a lot of kids with with muscular dystrophy. So that's really exciting. I'm so excited about the future and like all this cool stuff that we're gonna like cure diseases and everybody's gonna be like super healthy. I'm on the weight loss shot now, so I'm like, man, the future's looking bright. Like we don't have to we could just like fix everything that modern society has messed up.
Yeah, and we also have a pretty significant community in Prospera that are on into longevity and how do we ensure that people can live longer, healthier lives as opposed to just longer lives. And there's a lot of interesting stuff happening there as well. And a lot of that's not necessarily medicine. Some of it can be, and some of it can just be lifestyle choices. And they're actually developing their own community within Prospera that's focused on longevity. And so I think they will be the first of those special communities within Prospera that might say, we're not selling processed food or whatever it is within their community.
That would be so good.
That way. Yeah. So
I feel like I bought my house that was kind of like on the very end of suburbia, almost rural. And when I bought my house, there was no fast food nearby. But then like they just keep building and building and building like around me. And I'm like, no, I don't, go away. Like I would totally live in a city that did not have junk food. Totally. Because it's so hard when you're not on the weight loss shot. Now it's easy, but it's so hard to like have that like day-to-day discipline. It's so much easier to make the conscious decision to move to a community that shares your values.
right.
And the insurance system is such an elegant way of dealing with all of these things because the the institution that's going to pay if something goes wrong should be the one that's making the rules.
Right.
And so like I don't know if you've seen this clip of Dave Rubin on Joe Rogan and he asked about building codes and he doesn't really like have a good answer. And I know remember that building that was next to the ocean and the whole thing collapsed and a bunch of people died.
Right.
I remember there was a clip of Yaron Brook from the Ayn Rand Institute talking about that, and he had like a terrible answer. And it's like it's all about the insurance. The insurance company that insures the building or the project or any business liability should be the one assessing the risk and deciding, okay, well, you can do this, but it's going to cost you $1 million,
Right.
or this is what you have to do to bring down your premiums. It's a total disconnect to have the building code. So in that building that collapsed near the ocean, they were required by the building codes to have the rebarb in the concrete, but that's what made it collapse, because the salt water got into it and rusted it out. And so there should actually be a provision that if you're near the ocean, you shouldn't use rebarb. Anyway, so I'm so excited about the insurance. Whoever like designed all this is like very smart and has done a lot of good reading.
Yeah, so our team, I mentioned our founder and CEO, Eric Bremen, who's really the visionary behind Prospera. Our general counsel, Nick Dronius, and legislative counsel has spent decades looking at what works and what doesn't when it comes to policy, and spent a lot of time working on this. And I think you put it exactly right in that people want the certainty of some sort of regulation, but regulation has become a bad word because it's just these over prescriptive requirements that were added for one-off situations that just add this immense cost of compliance that make it impossible to even build in the United States. When you look at zoning, planning, permitting, that's what one of the things that is driving up housing costs, making it so expensive to find a place to live. Is it's not that builders don't want to build, it's that there's these enormous compliance costs. And the question is not should there be regulation or not, because you want to ensure that you're walking into a safe building that's safe for you to be in. But the question is, who bears the cost of deciding how it's built, and who's actually looking to make sure that it's safe and reasonably compliant with what are the best standards. And the insurance market is amazing at measuring risk. Like that's what the entire industry is built on.
Mm-hmm.
And this routinely happens in construction projects that get commercial liability insurance on particular buildings. They employ auditors who go to the site and ensure that things are actually being built in that way. And so it's not a totally foreign product, but it's never been applied at this level, at the regulatory level. And we're excited about it because, yes, insurers are risk averse. They don't want to, be on the hook for something that's likely to cause expensive damages. But they're also competitive. So, there's a price equilibrium that happens there where you have multiple insurers competing in a market for regulatory insurance that are actually judging the risks. And, we're excited to see that system grow. I mentioned about 200 businesses that have been incorporated so far. And a lot of them are doing innovative stuff that they couldn't do elsewhere. Some of them are doing more traditional businesses. So we have restaurants, we have real estate construction people, but all of them are using the system, and we're able to iterate. So if things aren't working, we're able to move quickly to change it in a way that it does work, always with an eye towards making sure the incentives are in place to prevent government overreach or bad outcomes that you see in other systems.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to share with us in the last few minutes we have here?
I appreciate you having me. I'd invite people to check out the project further if you're interested. I've mentioned our website is prospera.co. You can go there to join the City Builders Network. You can check out a visit if you'd like to come visit. You can check out some of the real estate options. But I would just invite people to reach out to us if you're interested in learning more. We're always looking to work or partner with either business owners or people who are interested in coming and staying for a while. It's very much a community-led project. I mean, we're close with all of our residents. We all share a lot of the same philosophy. Like, we're here for the same reason, to prove that we can do governance better. And it's exciting because we're building a new city. I mentioned Dubai. One of the people that's on our board of advisors was in the leadership of the Dubai International Financial Center. And I was sitting with him at Prospera a couple of years ago, and it was still early. We had multiple buildings under construction. And I said, well, so what was Dubai like back before you see all these massive buildings? He said, it was kind of like this, it was just starting out. And so it's encouraging to us to know that, we're looking to build off the best practices, not reinvent the wheel where we don't have to, but we have to get governance right. We have to avoid the things that have made government so failed in so many places. And
Mhm.
so it's exciting to see the development happen. And we'd invite anybody that's interested to join us, check it out, come visit, and help us build it.
Yeah, it's way warmer than New Hampshire.
That's
And
for
New
sure.
Hampshire winter is not something I want to do.
For sure. The weather is a big plus. There are definitely worse places to go than a Caribbean island.
Yeah. Maybe next winter we'll have to take a trip down there and check it out.
For
We
sure.
usually go to Florida for our winter vacation, but I don't know. Maybe I'm boycotting Disney now, so
Well, there's
we
lots to
can
do in Rotan. So, yeah, we have full packages for people who are interested.
that's awesome. Well, thank you for coming on. Um, that'd be cool if like somebody watched this and then went and like maybe I could get like a commission or something. Like
Yeah.
set up like an MLM here to like
Yeah.
market Prospera.
Yeah. We'd love to have you. We'd love to have you come down. Any of your audience, anybody that watches, reach out. You'll probably hear from me. So I work with a lot of the people who, initially come in. So, um, we hope to see some of you down there soon and hope to stay in touch. Appreciate the opportunity and the the chance to join you and talk about this. I think these conversations are really important to talk about. What does government really mean? Like, how is the best way to pursue it? And
Mhm.
just really appreciate you having me.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on, and we should talk again soon and update us on how it's going.
Sounds great. Thank you, Rochelle.